it will limit how much air goes into the oboe. So we're looking at flat in general, and especially the high notes, and the sweeter sound, right? So I combine things. If I need to play, say, a Strauss concerto, I need to play loud. So that would mean an open staple. But I don't want to play bright in the Strauss concerto. So I use the stained cane that is a little bit more soft. Because the big yellows, they are loud. And if I put loud with loud, it would be great for the Berio Sequenza, right? But not Strauss concerto. And then we get into scraping. And there are also variables. How much do we take out of the sides on that curve from the back into the heart? How much bark do we leave in? All of these are details. They are variables, right? And if we change these variables in one point, we will certainly affect what the reed responds in other variables. So I can mix and match these at will. I can probably sit down and make a narrow shape reed if I wanted to. I would have to make my tips a little longer and a little thicker, scrape more out of the heart. But still, with the narrow shape, I find myself locked into one sound. And I have a difficulty with that because I want to play different things. And even the same thing, even if I'm just on the proverbial Mozart quartet, every different phrase, I want to be able to aim differently and get a different result. I have to get in and out of the strings. And I can't do that as easily as I want to on a narrow shape.
Well, that's fascinating. And I think with all those variables and so many puzzle pieces that we have to put together, perhaps that's why the oboe attracts so many great minds. There's so much to consider, and it's a lifelong pursuit to always be toying with all those variables that we have.
Now that you mention, it's fascinating.
It really is.
It is a pain. I do realize that we oboe players have to depart music, to sit at a table and slave away at something else. But look at the privilege we have. I've seen string players that have 3 or 4 bows, each one of them costing as much as an oboe or more. And of course, their instruments cost as much as 3 or 4 of our houses. No? Right. And if they want to get a different sound, they have to go out there and buy another violin. And we have this amazing product in our hands. And if we play a recital, we can play a different reed for every piece. I remember 2 summers ago, Elaine Duval played beautifully Das Lied von der Erde at Aspen. And we were talking, she was telling me she used 3 reeds for that. Now, where do we find this kind of a privilege in other instruments? We can create our instrument. It's true that learning reeds is a bit of a pain, and it's not about music. Reeds are a science. It's specifics. It's engineering. It's physics even. It's not about music, but it produces music later on. So we need to depart music, get into our scientific mode. And no wonder you mentioned, yes, oboe players become great thinkers because we are forced to cross that line into science. I love it that we do this. I consider my reed table a lab.
Could you talk to us about how you take a reed from a blank to a finished reed?
Okay. Usually it takes me a week to finish a reed. So I'll make a blank and I'll have it sit for a few days, make sure it's dry. It's a wood. Cane is wood. When we wet wood, it changes configuration. It absorbs water and it sort of changes. So we need to have it dry several times to adjust to the new setting. So I will make a reed all the way to the end, all the way to the finished crow. It plays on the oboe, and I'll play a few notes and I'll leave it out. The next day I'll soak it again and play a few notes, make some small adjustments, clip the tip if needed, and I'll have it sit. And I'll do that for several days until the day comes that I soak it and it feels exactly the same as the day before. Then I know the cane has cured. The cane has stopped moving, right? And if you can imagine a diagram, here we go with more science and math, but the first 3 days of a reed's life, it decreases its power exponentially. It's a very steep decline. So if we make reeds to play that day, after about 3 days, it's not going to last anymore. It's going to be unusable. So during those 3 days, I don't play the reed. I wait for it to do its adjustments and do what it needs to do. And then the next run, it's more linear. And that can take weeks or even months. And my reeds last for months. Sometimes I'm almost embarrassed to say how old one of my reeds are. I just recorded a whole recital last week on a reed that I played, that I made in October, right? And also because I don't play my reeds to death right away. I play them and then I go play on another one. Of course, if an older reed doesn't have the body anymore, then it's unusable as well. But there is a moment when they all eventually fail, and then let it go. But you asked me about what do we do off the blank.
Yes.
My main concern is that tip. Again, the tip is everything. I will take the bark out of that, and I will finish as much as I can that tip, and I'll clip it, and then I'll go to the back and get the bark out. And then I go back to the tip and refine it more, and then I go back to the back. I keep going back and forth for two reasons. First, that I need to make sure my knife is always extremely sharp when I deal with the tip. If I feel like it's needing to be sharpened again, I'll just work a little bit on the back and then go sharpen it. And also the other reason is the concentration. I cannot allow myself to go on automatic pilot on the tip. I can probably do an automatic pilot on the back or the heart because they're low tech. But the tip needs 100% concentration. I cannot be any tired or distracted. So I go back and forth, refining the tip, and when I get tired, I go to the back. And it usually takes me about 5 minutes to finish a reed. And I tell my students to stay within that, 5 to 10 minutes most. Beyond that, it's going to be a practice reed at best, if it becomes a reed at all.
Is that because it stresses the cane out if you're scraping for too long?
Yeah, because I once had another scientific experiment. I went to the biology department at university where I was teaching, and I asked them to put my cane into a microscope, into a powerful microscope. Little did I know, I went there, I want to see an electron microscope. I said, why? And I said, no, you don't need that.
Who is this guy?
But I brought several kinds of cane, brand new cane, a reed that's already made, something that I just broke but used to be a fantastic reed, a bad reed, an old reed, and I put them in the microscope, and it was revealing. And for all of those oboe students who are still in college, I strongly recommend you either go to the biology department and do some research, or you buy. There are now little microscopes you can attach to your phone, and you can see the reed. If you get as much as 100 times augmentation, you can already see what I'm about to describe. So there are two elements of importance for us. First, of course, there are fibers. We talk a lot about fibers, all because the fibers in the reed. And then we have a mushy, gooey substance between the fibers. That is cellulose. That's what we use to make paper. And these two elements need to be understood. And that day, that biology professor was there showing this to me. And it dawned on me that I had been doing everything wrong by thinking about fibers. Fibers are squishy, and they are meant to keep the bamboo up, even when the wind blows. So they squish, and then they go back. So if I scrape, even on a super sharp knife, if I scrape on top of a fiber, it may just squish and then bump back. And sometimes when we look at our tips, again, even if we use a super sharp knife, you look at the tip, you're going to see those white streaks. Well, those are the fibers that just bumped up after we scraped. What is gone between them is the cellulose. The cellulose is that gooey stuff that we scrape off. And here's the thing, cellulose absorbs water. And takes the water up the bamboo. Just the same as if we get a tip of our paper and place it in the water, in just a few minutes, the entire piece of paper is going to be wet. Because that's what cellulose does. And more importantly, cellulose vibrates. Anything that is like a fiber, that is structural and malleable, will not vibrate the way we need it to. What makes our reeds vibrate is the cellulose. So if our knives are anything less than 100% sharp, we will scrape more cellulose out, and we're going to leave more of these fibers. And fibers are just a bit too clunky for us to rely on. At best, fibers will allow the distribution of vibration through the reed. But what the sweet sound, the beautiful things of a reed have to be found in more delicate material than that, and that is the cellulose. And I've seen great reed makers at work. And look, it takes 2 minutes for us to finish a reed. Think about it. We know how deep our tips need to be. We know how much to take out of the heart and the back. We just go. It takes 2 minutes or less, and we get to a reasonable depth. We can clip the tip and crow it. And then my next step after that is to make sure the physical part of the reed is finished. That is, it'll be easy to blow and it will crow a sharp C. At this moment, I will not play it on the oboe. I will not put it on the oboe until it crows a sharp C and is easy to blow. Why? Because we are musicians. We are creators. And if that reed is just slightly flat, we put it on the oboe and say, but it sounds so good. Oh, if I just bite a little bit, and then there goes our embouchure, there goes our air supply, I don't want to deal with that. So when I play it in the oboe, I want to see what are the tendencies of this reed. Does it tend to be too loud? Is it kind of brash? Is it kind of flat, even with the sharp C crow? It'll tell me what the cane wants to do. And then in the refinement part, we'll call this the spiritual part of reed making, when you make it really glow. This part is about working with those tendencies. So if I finish the physical part, and the reed is still kind of bloated. It has a beautiful sound, but it doesn't go anywhere. I know I need to thin the tip. I want to get it to a point that I call a game.